Hi, Bradley.
Barry.
Okay.
All right, so it's nice to see everyone today. Ryan said he couldn't make it, and then I don't know if we have any new people because yesterday Jesse and I met and talked about interns for the spring, and I sent out an email inviting them to our general meeting and then telling them how to onboard into the Slack, and I think probably also the Discord, but I'll just have them onboard into the Slack, and so that's coming up. I don't know, they may be coming in the next few weeks. We'll have to just kind of keep at it because just sometimes one email, they may or may not get it this time of the year. But
Yeah.
And we also have people maybe want to do it, want to delay their internship for summer or something. I saw one or two emails to that effect. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know one person wants to do it in the summer, which is fine because we could have our advertising for both. Yeah, and I'm going to kind of talk this morning in particular as if there's new people here, because I think some folks will check this out, or may refer to this meeting as like, oh, this is our last meeting. We talked about internships, at this point or in the start of it or whatever. So, yeah, we're just sending out sort of the, I don't know, acceptance, or like, okay, we think you might be a fit, come check out our lab, let's talk, and go from there emails. And I've gotten a couple replies. One person we'll be meeting probably Monday with. One person wants to do it next fall or next summer. And there's a bunch of others too. It's kind of that at UAlbany right now, classes haven't started yet, but I think they're starting next week, or after the holiday. And there's a lot of good stuff going on there. One of them also there was an email issue, which I sorted out with Curse and the undergraduate group. So that's good. There's a lot of nice applicants and a pretty good range. We had like informatics, we had computer science, engineering, we had linguistics and cognitive science, which is exciting. We had, I think, a math student and some other, like a pretty wide range of people and interests. Some specifically said I wanted to work in society, ethics, technology. Some were more creation of futures. Some like straight AI. So that was cool to see, and look forward to meeting all of those who do want to do stuff this semester or in the future in summer. So that'll be fun. And I am trying to pull up on my phone. I impromptu unintentionally visited. This is probably one of the better pictures here. My alma mater yesterday, like UAlbany here. You can kind of see that big tower in the background.
Yeah.
It's landmark tower citadel thing. It's purple because their clothes are purple and gold. So I was just passing through it, and it's kind of a cool twilight moment. It's like, I'm gonna stop at the campus because it's right by the highway. So that was a fun little detour last night. But yeah, always a lot of cool stuff is happening with UAlbany. I may try to even visit. There's a new building I haven't visited yet. But that was fun. And yeah, we could talk maybe a little bit more about the internship later on. But I'll I did make the notes document for today is ready. There's not really anything on it right now other than some things to cover about deadlines and the abstract request that Angela found. And kind of some things from last week. And yeah, nothing totally. Well, I guess the abstract is brand new and it's due the next few days, but we can talk about that when we get there. But I mean, we can do general updates too. I don't know if anybody's Bradley or Amanda, you want to start with anything?
Why don't you go, Amanda, if you have something?
I don't really have anything. Wednesday's meeting for Cognition Futures was good. I'm enjoying getting back into Fuchs, and I'm excited to finish. Not that I think we've taken too long, but we've spent a long time with this book, so it'll be rewarding to finish up. And I'm glad that we are like checking in with the what we want to actually produce project wise. Yeah, that's it for me.
Well, good. That's good. Yeah. We've already talked about the books that we might have in mind. So I don't know if maybe it makes sense to jump into a new book, or like to kind of sort things out for a couple weeks before we do that. Sure.
One thing I do want to do is go back to that Kaplan collection before we completely move on.
Yeah.
And just revisit some of that.
Well, I was gonna say yes. I feel like there's stuff to kind of look at there again. But what's been interesting about Fuchs, and I've never read a book like this in a group before, because I think we started that book at late summer or early fall.
Yeah.
We've covered a whole season. We've been like read one book for a whole semester. We aren't finished with it yet. I've never done that before. And what's interesting is that doing it that way, and I'm not sure it may not always be, this is kind of experimental in that sense. I don't know if I want to duplicate this, but it's been really interesting because there's been so many direct points of interface from everything else across time, and I'm really glad it's the Fuchs book, because of all the books that I've read so far in this vein, I feel like the way Fuchs spends a lot of time, like I think maybe like a fifth of the book or a sixth or something is like literally him orienting his argument to other stuff. And I feel like that's been really good for me. Maybe not for everybody all the time, but like for me personally, that's been really good. Because it's sort of like, what are we actually interfacing with? And having that over the course of a semester repeatedly brought up in like regular discussion in my mind has been good. And I really I think Fuchs, for those who have no context at all, we're talking about, the book is called The Ecology of the Brain by Thomas Fuchs. I think it's 2017. Oh, here we go. I'm gonna share my screen. And we have a consistent meeting group. But these are all of these Cognition Future reading groups here. We're at 28 now, basically. But we've been going through them and kind of recording our discussion on this book. So we've been at this book for a long time. I wonder which one we actually started at. But that's from the time. But the book itself is here we go. The Ecology of the Brain. And it's been kind of our mainstay for a while. You can kind of see the outline here. It started with he spends the first part of the book situating himself against kind of reductionism, and then expands his views about the brain as a relational organism, the brain like moving from the mind-body problem to the body-body problem to this sort of dual aspectivity of inner and outer world, and how there isn't actually duality necessarily, but maybe in a certain context it is. But we're shifting away from sort of Cartesian reductionism, and then how he's trying to do that. We're on chapter 6 now. We're getting to chapter 7 and towards the end of the book. So it's kind of a nice time. And the reading group is open to anybody who would like to participate, but it's kind of based in the Cognition Futures research team. So that's kind of what we're talking about. And I guess I'll kind of just jump into, since we're talking about that now. Yeah, I really, my, as I said, it's been nice to kind of have a longer term view about all of this. And we have some ideas about the future books. There's also one here in the Slack. I forget what it was, but it was something about child as a natural phenomenologist, which sounds potentially like another candidate. And one of my goals for this weekend is to put a little more effort into fleshing out the mission and vision statements for the project, and continuing to projectify or break down our questions and our aims into a little more coherent things. So that way, especially for newer people who, if they want to work on this project within the methods project itself, it's sort of a little bit more clearly defined, or at least made explicit, so that people who are not, who are new, or who just haven't been in the meetings know at least what the targets are, and maybe they want to help out with it or have an idea they can contribute to it. So that's kind of what that's about. But yeah, Cognition Futures is there may be some folks interested in that. I have to reply to some other emails about non-New Albany folks have expressed some interest in that, and there's a lot going on. When we get to deadlines, we'll talk about like the CogSci deadline and potentially the other things ahead. I did not go to the APA deadline, or I missed it because it was at like 5 p.m. and I thought it was later in the day, but it doesn't really matter. I wonder if I could still ask them for an extension. I don't even know, but it doesn't matter. Yeah, Cognition Futures is going pretty well, and it may, well, I'm at a natural pausing point before I go into other things, so I'll defer to Bradley or Amanda anything else they want to update before we go into other things. Anything you want to say, Bradley? Is it a general update?
Yeah, I'll give an update. Then you can go on with some of the things I saw that you had in the Notion. And for people who are just watching this, trying to get to know what we do here, Jesse has worked extensively on building different types of relational databases for notes and for other things, and this has been a long-term project of his. And if you're interested in this, you can work on some things with him. I mean, once you get in the door in the lab, you would want to find something that you can take ownership of, or at least learn something about. And this is one of the things you can do aside from research is research management. So this is a very good example in the meeting of how this works. So this is our Notion here. We have a Notion for every meeting, and then there's a library of notes. And so the things that we talk about, they can be, sometimes they have tentacles that go to future weeks or to future other meetings. And so this is something we want to be able to capture and trace out. So, we talk about Cognition Futures. We have other meetings within our group. And so if you're interested in those meetings, we can talk about some of the different meetings that we have. We usually have, so for example, we have our Cognition Futures meeting. We have an open source group, interest group that meets, on and off. We met last summer and fall on Fridays, and then this spring we'll probably be doing it, but in a different format. And then, we also have our EvoWorm group, which is a developmental biology group, and computational biology group, and that's on Mondays. So we have all these different side meetings aside from this meeting that you can dive into topics a bit more deeply. But we also have research and project management skills that you can learn, and those are kind of above everything else. So that kind of falls into that open source category, or the open source meetings in that category. So with that in mind, I was going to talk about something that's coming up. So next week I'm going to be teaching an open source flavored project management course. It's going to be based at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, but I'm going to be offering some of the content on this within the lab.
Can I say one thing before we jump into that
Yeah.
about the lab for people who don't know the lab? Is that this lab, I think a tremendous gem in this lab that we center more than many other labs I've been in is we really put emphasis on opportunities to develop like research management, project management, and some professional development skills to you as even as an undergraduate, even as someone brand new. Like we will kind of talk about things with future development in mind, and I feel like that's something that I was at a grad school application panel and a few months ago, and one of the things that stuck with me is how they said, when you're looking for advisors and mentors, like you have to understand not every mentor and advisor in grad school, or obviously, to an extent in undergrad, but in grad school, even PhD advisors, not everybody has a lot of training in mentorship or communicating how to be a mentor, what a mentee should expect, and how to develop in your role, even whatever level you're at. And I feel like this lab is really, really good at that, and was a valuable things that has transferable skills outside of, if you don't want to do pure research your whole life, that's okay. Like having some of the management, coordination, and communication, like science communication skills are something we really try to give a lot of opportunities for. And even so much so that, like, to segue back into Bradley's course, like I think an outcome from a lot of our efforts seem to be going into like Brazil. Now Bradley's sort of put together this actual course that he will be telling us about soon. So
yeah, so let's see. So we have this syllabus here. So I've been trying to sort of build parallel syllabi from between what's being offered in the lab and then the actual in-person course. So I'm going to have sort of for the lab here, I'm going to offer the lecture notes and some of the just examples of the quizzes, and then we'll also talk a little bit maybe separately about this paper idea that the students in the physical course are going to do, but this isn't something that you can do it if you want, but it's totally optional. So this is project management. So it's about working on how to organize projects, how to make things happen, but it's from an open source perspective, or what they call at Mozilla working open. So Mozilla is a company or it's a nonprofit that has been involved. They originally were involved in the Mozilla browser project, and that came out of Netscape, which was one of the first graphical internet browsers. And so they, at some point in the early 2000s, they transitioned to making Netscape open source, and they called that project Mozilla. And then they also later on started to get into some of these things about internet culture and research ethics or technology ethics and so on. So they've built up this. When I was this was in the late aughts, so it wasn't that long ago. But there were cohorts of people who they trained in this area of working open, and so that's where I first got exposure to this idea. It's open source practice, but it's also like open everything practice. And in the course, I'll talk a little bit. I'll draw from that sort of diversity of different project types that you can make open. But the critical skills here, working open. How do you work with like collaborators from around the world? How do you use the internet to bring people together? How do you coordinate your activities? Whether, it doesn't even need to be code. It can be a lot of different things. It can be text. It can be, working on, I guess, art if you want. I mean, there are so many options here. There's open hardware, so designing things collaboratively. But the idea is that you're working together. You're working maybe asynchronously. You're working virtually. You're doing all these things. And you're trying to make big things happen. So that's the idea here. So there's some reading materials in the syllabus. There's this working open textbook. This is from the Mozilla Foundation. This is kind of a good introduction to what they have in terms of working open, like what they mean by working open, sort of the terms of what they mean. There's this other book, and I think I mentioned this in a previous meeting, Ben Cotton, Program Management for Open Source Projects. So this is kind of hard to get through Amazon. I don't know where else you can get it. I got my copy through Amazon. It took like 3 weeks to get here, but I have it, and it's basically a lot of the content in the syllabus you're going to see in this book as well. I liked it because I got this book because I said, well, I have to have this for the class. I want to compare notes, and basically the notes are very similar in a lot of ways. So, this course will cover a lot of things. This isn't like required, but I would highly recommend reading this. This is, Ben Cotton, I think, runs an open source program at, I think, Kubernetes or one of the big companies. In any case, they do, they're working on projects through their organization. And, it's basically, a host of different topics. And so, that gives you some idea of, what people are doing in context. There are other books like this ebook Project Management, which gives some good details on how to manage a project, in terms of human relations and some of the technologies that you might use to organize things. So it's very good as well. That's on the web. That's not something that you can order as a physical book, but it's also based on I think it's a course that was offered at one of the universities in British Columbia. I'm not really sure which one. It could have been the University of British Columbia, but in any case, that's there. Then there are other things like, we'll talk about distributed version control. We'll talk about community building. So how do you engage people through a open source community? Those are very common now, especially in corporations where they want to get maybe sometimes their customers or sometimes their users to, be engaged with the product or be engaged with things that are going on in the company. So this is, also something that has corporate value, although, it's really about just this general set of skills. And then the next set of readings are just kind of references for like GitHub, how to use GitHub. And that's important. We're going to go kind of down into the weeds about some of the aspects of GitHub. So if people already know how to use GitHub, it's that part of the course is a little basic, but some people don't know how to use that. And you have to start at the level of, I know what GitHub is, maybe I've used it once or twice, but I don't know like how to implement maybe this version control system for my project. How do I do that? And so we go through GitHub docs. I'm citing some of Jesse's work too. And I was kind of hoping, Jesse, if you want to be involved in promoting your work on collaboration tools, that we can make those things public. I know you have some videos, and so if you want to make some more videos, that's fine too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm happy to do that or create any content or like host discussions. Like, I don't know, or not like host, but like speak it at them. I don't know, like however the best way for me to be involved with that, I'm open to that. And it's a good Friday at that time is a great time for me. Which,
Yeah.
Also is I forget how asynchronous the event the class itself will be like.
Oh.
Is there a set meeting time at that time?
Well, yeah, the meeting time is it's like Tuesday and Thursday physically, and that's something that it's here at the university, but like you would be like we have an office hours that I'm
Oh yeah, that was the
proposing.
office
Yeah,
hours.
so that's Fridays from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern time, and that's that's something we can talk. I like to have an office hours for students, but I also like to have like maybe more discussion too. So we might have discussion groups during that time, and that might be broader.
But yeah, to answer your question on interflow, yes, I'm interested in helping and creating stuff for that. We're having discussions about all that stuff.
Yeah, I think that, and I mean, this will benefit you too. I don't want to make it seem like I'm leaning on you for a favor. It's just kind of like, but no, I mean, it's just kind of a to create content like that where and maybe you can develop your own course on collaboration tools from that. So it'd be nice to have like some good materials. This is something I worked on with an intern last year, and we worked through some of these things, some of these topics. So this is being drawn from some work I did with a student intern, and so this is all there's the readings here, the reference things, and then the schedule. Basically, we're going to go through. We're going to start very simply and then move out to some specific topics. So, there's this introduction to open source and open access. So the idea is it's not just open source, it's open access. It's like open publishing, open hardware, open design, and then there's, of course, the traditional open source. So all those things are, if you want to create a project like publishing a book, or a project like, building a piece of software, or a project like an academic collaboration. People have done academic collaborations like this through there was the Polymath project, for example, where they worked on problems in a distributed manner like that. And so they're all different options here. Then there's introduction to GitHub and version control, which is kind of walking through how to, push things to a repository, how to structure a repository, things like that. And then that's very important for working asynchronously, because we're, trying to build, if I'm working with someone in India, it's evening in India. So if they join Saturday morning NeuroSim, they're actually it's Saturday evening NeuroSim for them. So, that's an issue that you have to deal with. You have to sometimes, accommodate time zone differences, but also you have to have mechanisms for working asynchronously, and that's just the fact of life. And then, people aren't always available at the same times of day, even if they're on the same time zone. So it makes for very flexible working. And then after that, then we get in. There's a quiz on version control, which is basically walking through some version control examples. And then from there we move into things like community resource management, which is this idea of having an open source community. You have a bunch of people who are interested in a topic or a project. How do you manage those resources? That could be with documentation. It could be with community standards. It could be with collaboration tools and community relations. This is where, we get into the collaboration tools aspect. And I know that Jesse has this open house video on collaboration tools and open source. It's a very important part of this. Then there's public events and discussions. So, the idea of having events like hackathons or docathons that drive forward your project is very much from the agile point of view of project management. And we'll be drawing from that, but also other areas as well. Then there's contributor and stakeholder management. So how do you manage your stakeholders? How do you manage your contributors? And then, having a community as a base of operations. So if we have a community in this meeting, and every meeting has like its own little community, and then that community does things to contribute to making that successful. And that's what I mean by community, although, there are other definitions of it. But the idea is to engage people, keep people engaged, make sure everyone's being well served. And it's a very challenging thing, actually. It's more about human relations than it is about, there's a lot of strategy, but it's definitely something that can be very fickle with respect to people working well together. So that's all going to be kind of covered. And then, project scope and types of contribution. So this is where we talk about scoping and rescoping. So like if I start a project, the cognition futures is actually a good example. We had a scope at the beginning, and that was sufficient for what we wanted to do at the beginning. And then as we move on, we start doing things, discussing things, finding interesting hooks. This is not like a technical project, but still, you can think of it like as a set of issues that you want to address. And then, at some point it becomes better just to rescope things and think, okay, now what new directions do we want to go in? Where do we want to reallocate our resources? So this is rescoping, and this happens a lot in projects. Again, if you take the agile point of view, that's the way they kind of approach it, as calling it rescoping. But the idea is the same. You're reformulating what your goals are, and then you use things like Kanban boards and other types of issue management tools to get some of these things down into actual issues. And then, there are other things like project control systems. And then there's another quiz on issue management, which is, again, walking through set of examples. Then there's project and community sustainability, and this draws from the work that we've been doing on community sustainability. And that may be something that, we'll draw from the work that's being done in the lab here on open source sustainability. And so that's going to be play a role in that. But also, thinking about how to create leaders and maintainers. So this, the stuff we've done has been like modeling maybe user behavior, collective behavior, but there's this other aspect of it, which is how to create leaders and maintainers and self-perpetuating activity. So how do you motivate that, and how do you get that off the ground and maintain it? So it's not a lot of things we've talked about, but some of the things that we haven't talked about really and thought about. This is all engaging. It's supposed to engage people and motivate them, inspire them. So, then there's project life cycle, which is just thinking about the length of your project, financial and budgeting. So how do you get it funded? Different strategies for that, and then so there's a paper involved here, and I think this is at the bottom. Yeah. So there's a paper option here. Well, for the people doing the class in person, it's mandatory. But if you're interested in doing this paper, I think it's a good development tool for thinking about some project that you want to accomplish. So the term paper here, and there's an alternative for the course, physical course, but I'll talk about the one option at the top. So the term paper is develop a 10-page paper on a hypothetical open source project that you would like to manage. It could be something that interests you or something that you've always wanted to bring to fruition. The goal of this paper is to describe your project and the ways in which you would manage this project using open source and working open principles. So this is, something where you would come up with a hypothetical project that you want to see as an open something. So it could be a book project, or it could be like a piece of software you want to develop, or it could be like a project management style or tool. And then you would give it a name, and you go through all this. And then you'd say, well, these are the principles I'm going to bring to bear on this. And, it doesn't have to be everything, but it has to be like, these are the things I want to focus on, how I would implement them. It just shows that, you thought about like how these principles apply to what you want to do. And so, like I said, I think it's a good exercise in like really kind of integrating a lot of these concepts into what you're interested in. So, if you're doing the course through the lab here, you might develop this as like not a paper that you turn in, but more of like a proposal that you might use for a project that you want to accomplish. And working through, it'd be a working document, basically. Work through what you want out of it, some of the things you want to focus on with like an open source community or some set of tools, and then think, okay, how do I make this happen? How do I develop it? And sometimes those kind of documents are useful because they tell you kind of what kinds of things that, sort of deficiencies that you see that you need to think more about, because you don't think about every aspect of a project when you start planning it. You say, I want to do this thing, and I want to accomplish it through these means. And sometimes there are things that come up that you don't anticipate or you don't understand very well, and you have to rethink your approach in light of that. So, I mean, for example, I've done projects where, you try to plan everything in advance, and then there's some piece that comes up in the middle of the project. Um, and I would run experiments in like any set of experiments. You design the experiment, you come up with some really nice plan, really nice plan. You have all your resources together, and then you start running the experiment, and then you find out halfway through that there's some problem that you have with the design, or that there's something you forgot about, maybe like timing or planning, managing your time more effectively or something with running the experiments. Sometimes in human experiments, like with experiments of virtual reality, you have problems recruiting participants, and you have to like work around that. Or sometimes you have problems with like a computer procedure that needs to run, and the software breaks halfway through it, and you have to debug things. And then sometimes that's maybe not what you want. Sometimes the data you're collecting, you notice that there's a bug in it, or that you aren't collecting the right variables. There are things like that. And so, this is, and I'm thinking just about experimental design here. I'm giving an example, which just shows you that, like, if you were to come up with an open experimental design platform for this thing, you could both crowdsource some of these problems to people. People could use this protocol or use this sort of framework for their own use, and then, everyone benefits. Or, you could actually get feedback on it. People would say, oh, well, that doesn't make any sense. Because you look at it and you say it's fine. And, maybe you waste like 6 months learning the hard way that it doesn't work. Or someone comes up to you in a week and say, well, that's not going to work because of this. And I didn't think about that. So, I mean, I'm just giving one example, which is actually a good example. I just came up with it on the fly, but it just shows you how this is useful in many domains. And so, what I want to do is I want to offer the lectures, and we'll have the office hours, and that might be an area for people to come and discuss things, both in the lab and then outside, or from the physical course and from the lab. And, we'll see how it goes. So, do we have any questions or comments?
I have ideas, but I don't know. Manic, go first. Yeah, this is great. First question, can I invite other people who are lab adjacent or interested in this stuff to the course, to go virtually through the lab?
Well, yeah, we can invite people to the office hours, for example. We can also do.
I meant like to go through the course, but like if someone wanted to go through the course, like join our lab and do the course that way, kind of a thing.
Yeah. So I mean, what I'm making available to the lab are the lectures. I'm not sure if I'm going to record the lectures. I'm definitely going to have the slides that will be the notes, and then the office. So what I have, actually, this is an important point, is there's a Discord that we have. That's it's like our educational Discord, and we haven't done a lot in it, but there's a link in the syllabus here at the top, and that Discord will be this project management channel. Will be the place where we do a lot of discussion of things, and so they can join that, and we can, that'll be a place too where we have like discussions. So yeah, we can invite people through that, to join that Discord, and then everything would be distributed through there, and then, I think they'll get something out. The what will be offered through the lab will be more asynchronous than the course itself, the physical course. But yeah.
So cool, that's good. Some folks from Plot Twisters may be interested in that as well. Like just as a even if they don't like fully participate, I could see some folks, because there's a lot of overlap for any virtual organization or distributed organization, which Platforms is and some other groups are, even like some Joe Pro related stuff also. So that's cool. Secondly, and this, I feel like this is something to maybe some like internally in a Notion sense, I would like to I want to build this out now. It used to be like an article or something, and maybe make some kind of a blog post or something, but that I could cite here and say, oh, look at this. Because what I'm about to say for folks, a lot of people, especially early career people, and I do want to have like a separate discussion potentially about intern stuff perhaps next. So I will section that off about that specifically. But for early career people especially, I think it's hard to convey the magnitude of how much saying you understand open source, open science, perhaps open work, but like open source and open science practices matter. And from many different angles of academia and industry are really, really talking about this now in ways that I haven't seen it before. We mentioned previously at Society for Neuroscience, NIH. It's actually happening, I think, in tomorrow or this week or something. The big governmental mandate saying you need to make your lab open. You need to instill these practices. And a lot of the front line of this practice is going to be early career grad students, undergrads getting into these labs saying you need to make these practices differently. How are you going to do that? And that affects funding from the NIH. Similarly, on the APA, American Psychological Association, there was when you were submitting your materials for poster or presentation, whatever, there was a section specifically saying how do you involve open science, open source practices in your submission. This will affect how we view your submission. So this isn't just like cool ideas. Like there are major movements across different aspects of the industry, conveniently, which we all talk about here in Orthogonal Lab. But you know, this is a big movement for us. So having a course where we have project management based around open source principles, it isn't just sort of a cool idea. It's very relevant to it, and I continue to see these things as not just like nice ideas, but like these will become future standards that the world is moving towards across many different fields. So having exposure or some kind of a credential or a course or saying, yeah, I did a project about this specifically, I think that's a really valuable thing, and it's only going to get more valuable going forward. So I feel like I want to put something together saying what I just said, because it feels like each week there's another like, oh yeah, let's cite this reference for why this is important. Let's cite this big change happening. Let's cite, oh, at this major conference happening. Let's cite, you know, and even like the motivations you talked about working with your other person to make that course and all the things you've done in the lab, the motivations that are going into why this matters, I feel like this should be painted out very clearly in a nice picture for everyone to see, because I know it and we kind of know it, but like that it's still in a buried, like, oh, I think the headline is still buried about this. Not here in the lab, but like I think it's increasingly important. I'm changing my tune and being like, yeah, for early career researchers, the open source stuff isn't really just like a cool thing to do, like and use GitHub. It's like everybody's asking about it now, and it's going to keep getting that way. So.
Well, yeah, that's a great thing to bring up, because I'm going to probably add that into the slides as I'm making them. And that'll be like, you know, the motivating why it's important for people.
I would volunteer to help with that or like cross-pollinate that, because I think I think for my own purposes and a lot of things that we are doing, like putting that, making that explicit will help people understand, and having very specific, like I'm like unintentionally collecting these citations. This is this thing here, this thing here, and even to an extent, some of the like consumer electronic stuff I looked at recently, which is not open source. This is particularly, but there's overlaps to it, and the way people want to understand and manage some of the data. Yeah, so yes, very cool course. I'm looking forward to it. Let me know. Feel free to. We've talked about this, but just like keep me abreast of anything with that.
Okay. I had one more thing about this is that there's
Yeah.
going to be a GitHub repository at the Oro group GitHub organization. So this will be where the homework, the quizzes are going to happen. The syllabus is here, and then there are some other things like I'll have people creating issues and things like that. But there'll also be like other things here where maybe we like I'm thinking of having all the papers in this repository as a directory, so it sort of serve as a open repository for people to draw from. There are also opportunities we might do in the GitHub repo here to put in different examples of things that aren't quizzes, like putting together like an exercise where you do something in GitHub that is not. I mean, GitHub has its documentation, but how do you actually develop documentation in GitHub, like in context? So that's why I created a GitHub repo for this project. It's just Orel group / project management, and so we can develop that as well, and that'll be useful outside of the immediate context of the course for other like people doing things through the intern program and other things like that.
I had a tangential idea for the course, or not really for the course, but kind of something that's adjacent. I've looked at a whole bunch of graduate school, masters, certificates, professional certificates, courseworks, and stuff lately. It may be interesting to like have a list of other, like here's a Coursera specialization in like tech project management or something like that. And in the sense, and I guess I'm implicitly saying it would be cool to sort of compare notes. Not saying everybody should do that, but like here are some other, almost like further reading, but like further coursework that is available, because I've seen some, and I'd be really curious what folks in this group have come across that end, because I'm actually potentially looking at a smaller, like not a master's, but like some kind of a certification in such things. So that'd be cool. I'd be curious, at least just to ask some of the folks there, or like have a space to like in the Discord or something. I don't know, somewhere to say, hey, have you seen the coursework like this? And like, what was it good? Did you like at least think it'd be interesting to take, or complimentary or something? That's a minor note, but yeah.
Okay. So that's all I had for that. Jesse, do you want to launch into your thing that you were going to talk about?
Yeah, there's a few things, and I want to ask you, Bradley, because I don't know, we can do this now, and I don't know, you kind of saw the docket that's on the list for things to do today, and I don't know what's not on that list that you wanted to do. But I think it would be good to do a right now at the start of the semester take on what can I as an intern do or projects to work on in an explicit way. And I can do that. We can walk through that now, or we can do that separately. I don't know how you feel about those two.
What other things do you want to do?
Like outside of that discussion?
Yeah.
Well, what I'm seeing is we kind of went over your project management, internship stuff is that. I don't know if we have anything more to say about open house. The methods, the cognition future stuff is kind of there. Mostly for me, it would just be going over to submission opportunities.
Okay.
And if we have time, some of this stuff, but that's about it. So mostly just submission opportunities aside of.
Why don't we do actually, if we could do the intern stuff as a separate video, maybe, like have them, and then they can just look at it when they come in.
Yeah, because I was thinking like, hold on here, sorry. I was thinking that we could do some of it now and all that stuff, but like we'd have to segment it time wise and say, oh, look at this, and that's cool, but it might be a nice explicit shorter, like we can have our prepared, just like be a little more streamlined, just like here's what it is, because people always ask that, and we always talk about it, and we'll talk about it. If someone's watching this, we will talk about this as much as we want. Like there's no pressure. Like we'll meet with people. We'll be going through this in the next couple of weeks. But I think also having just a reference video about boom, 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 boom. Here are some very specific things you can do, and you can be very involved this way, or you can read some. You can do a literature review on this machine learning technique, or this part of AI ethics, or this philosophy or cognition related topic, and that's fine too. So we can do that separately. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, I think didn't you do a video on that last year, like I think that was more like the general expectations.
Yeah, and there was definitely a video I made on types of deliverables, like from blog to academic article, to working on a conference presentation, to a poster, to an academic paper you want to get published, at all the way up and down the scale, and understanding that we're here to help.
It'd be nice if we could have a couple of these videos and then have a Medium post that we can point to on a regular basis. Yeah.
And then you can talk about it open.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's just recycling the content, just so that we don't have to do it over again and reinvent the wheel later.
Yeah, I think the Medium is good. Onboarding thing. Okay, cool. So, I guess I'll do a very abridged intern teaser, and with understanding we'll be doing a lot more of that next week, and many in-person one-on-one meetings. So don't feel that's not happening, because that will happen, and then we'll be doing that other stuff we said. But share my screen again. So really broadly, I would just say again, for those who are getting emails back, congratulations. We look forward to meeting you. We look forward to finding a fit here with you. I'm going to talk more about Cognition Futures, or I kind of did, I suppose, but basically Cognition Futures, we have a main project of the methods project, and we have a bunch of other opportunities of, we've had people passengers have looked in like the role between AI and empathy, or how machines can deal with interpreting human emotions. We've had 2 people do some nice exploratory work on that. And there's a lot of opportunities for things like that. I really enjoy having Amanda here, who's also in this particular call video this week. Amanda has a really strong philosophy background and is very good at kind of helping to construct or deconstruct where things are in a argument sense, and how to move things forward or not, or evaluate them. And that's, if you're into philosophy and that kind of work, I'm really happy to have that aspect of things sort of in this project. And then kind of what we mentioned earlier about the book and the reading group, that's all there. For the Society Ethics Technology team, there's a lot going on. We're hoping to be part of New York Celebration of Women in Computing again. We've been there several years in a row. We've had a lot of group ethics related projects. We have Brian, not in the lab today, but Brian's doing part of the Google Summer of Code, open source, sustainable open source practices. There's a sustainability auditing tool, which is an outgrowth from that. A lot of cool stuff has happened there. Actually, I'm going to show, whoops, hold on. I'm going to really quickly just show, really quickly show this, which is condition features, but so these, if you haven't seen this page, this JoPro internships program, you can kind of see some of our early work here. This is all from last year, basically, and they've been at some nice events. This is the tool I just mentioned with Brian's. I'm taking this is his baby, I suppose. But this has been fun to work on this course. This is a bit more on the computational side. But yeah, we kind of have the computational track and like analytical or not as technically based track for those who want to do either. And there's a lot of overlap between them. But yeah, Society Ethics Technology Group. We also presented at We Robot last year, which is a really cool thing on our virtual lives and digital companionship, and how we're relating to all that stuff. So that was cool to see all that. And these are all, everything here is open for internships to work on. So please check out this website to see some of those things. I think going back to this list, yeah, there's opportunities for those who like, oh, I'm really interested in I'm interested in a specific like if you're really curious about like GTP3 or GTP4 and you want to just do a research project on that, you can. Or we submitted a proposal to New York Celebration of Computing about how like AI generated content like writing or art is being affected. Like that's a pretty broad topic too. So yeah. Oh, and hi.
Sushmanth. Hello.
Welcome.
Hi, Bradley. How are you?
All right. How are you?
Fine. Just thought I could learn something when I came.
Yeah. Would you like to introduce yourself or?
Yeah. Myself, Sushmanth Reddy. I'm a student at Amrita Vishwavidyapitham. Actually, I was working on Devograph and Devolan. Actually, I was contributing to it. Yesterday, I was working on issue right on that, and I was doing deep learning related to image segmentation, etc. in neural network interpretability. That my depth, I think.
Yeah, welcome. I know you joined our DevaWorm group last Monday, so yeah, welcome to the meeting here. It's a little bit different focus, but it's still there's a pretty good AI component, so that's something. Yeah, I find that interesting.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So Jesse, if you want to. Oh well, that was it. The part. Yeah. So going through. Where we left off here.
Yeah, we were just. It's funny because I think this month actually messaged me about open projects that were open and kind of came into the tail some of that. I would say I'll put the link in the chat that I just had.
Okay.
This isn't everything in the lab. It's just some of the ones that I've been involved in. You can kind of see the main. You can see the headers go from there. But basically, we just went over condition futures and society ethics and tech team with some of the recent projects we've done and said there's kind of what's moving forward with that. So if you want, you can kind of look at the replay to see a bit more of it. But it's stuff you may already know about. So
okay. I'll just get a familiarity around this and I'll discuss with you if I found anything interesting.
Okay. But I think that was kind of, I was just doing a really quick overview of all of that, and then I was going to move on to submissions talk. Is that okay with it? Because it's we've got 1 hour gone, so I think we'll just do this and jump to everything else. But the latest on the submissions talk is we are waiting to hear back from that. I think I said I feel pretty good about it, and that was basically that involved some of the computer generated stuff that involved a Brian's component with sustainability auditing tool, ethical regulators, and the work in the Google Summer of Code about open source communities and practices within them. That's kind of all wrapped up in that submission, which hopefully we'll hear back from soon. The APA deadline, the Psychological Association, that's passed. I may still try to attend it, or maybe I'll message them and see if I can still submit it. But that was more like earlier in the week, and I'm only thinking about asking for an extension now, so it probably won't happen. But this actually, this is between the CogSci one, which we'll definitely do, and I'm kind of drafting how to do that from like our Cognition Futures, what to do there. This is the new one. This is basically Sustainable AI Conference that Angela found. So thank you for that, Angela. And it's pretty broad. It's due in a few days, and I kind of want to ask if Brian wants to submit something for the auditing tool, because I know it's a little bit, maybe not the most, it maybe doesn't sound like it would fit here, but I think it could in terms of some of, like if you know, some of, if you're having reasonable practices with your technology, that's a good thing for the environment too, and for broader sense of sustainability. I know it's more sustainable in the sustainable user-based sense and not necessarily that kind of sustainability, but I think there's a way it could work here. But beyond that, there's a lot of things we could talk about in terms of, I may craft something specifically about digital sovereignty, colonialism, because there's an amazing piece from, it's not the Atlantic, I don't think. It might be the Atlantic. But there's a whole series on like AI and digital colonialism, and I think it'd be really cool to talk about that at this event. But we have a few things that overlap here, and I didn't know if anyone. I think I mentioned Aaron. I don't think Aaron's going to join today. Angela's not here today. Brian's not here today. And even like Ankit or Rishab, I think might be have stuff to say about this. I'm going to try to reach out to them and see if they have any draws for this, because I think I'm going to try to submit something to this, but it may just be kind of my it may just be me putting it together, because it's such a short turnaround for this. Angela, it's due in 2 days, so if people are interested in that, reach out to me. Or if you have any ideas, you can say them now. But I'm going to kind of think about that today and put together a very. It's a short abstract. There's no papers to do at this time, so it's kind of just conceptually putting together and putting words to it. So that's on my mind. And thank you, Angela, for finding that and sharing that. It'd be really cool if she could go to it. It is in Germany, and she's based there, so that's fun. But that's basically. The new material for that. I guess I'll show this too because I can. For Cog, did you want to say something about that?
No. Oh, well, I was going to point out that it's good to have, even if we don't submit to something, it's good to like think about the topics that they're looking for and kind of come up with something, because you can always use these for other things, and it does drive like sort of the intellectual discourse a bit. It tells you like what people find maybe are interesting to them, or what topics people are looking for, and then you can drive like an idea from that and say, well, there's this idea, and if we don't submit it to this, or if it doesn't get accepted, you just keep working on it.
To be a bit deep in the weeds, or do what's probably a really anachronistic term right now, inside baseball. The cool thing about this that I know, mostly from my experience here in the lab, is that I would consider this conference, and by that I mean the one that Angela found, this is not a reach conference, but this is not our our domain of main activity.
Right.
So what our strategy here is, how do we reasonably convert our existing projects and interests into something that links our actual work and development interest, and just who's in the lab and who wants to do stuff, which is always a factor. Who are the troops ready at hand that want to, go into this battle, which is not necessarily how I think about research, but you know what I'm saying. And how do we take that and then make something relevant and also useful for the conference audience and ourselves? And that's like a definite research, even life skill, but like in academia, you're going to have to do that a lot. And you don't want to go for things that are too deleterious for your time and energy. But in this case, like the requirements are fairly amenable,
Yeah.
and we have someone there, and like it's the topics I think are important. Like they matter. All of these topics matter to me, like from a variety of different ways. So because of that, there's enough, at least for me, like if nothing else happens, I know I have the motivation and the desire to do this. And so it's kind of like, at a meta level or administrator's level, or as a like developing your awareness as a researcher level, like that's okay to do sometimes. And you learn a lot, as Bradley was saying, about how do you orient your main stuff to sort of periphery things. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to do that here. So it's cool. Yeah, and I was going to say very briefly about CogSci 2023. Submissions are due soon. I was invited to be a reviewer for some of the papers, which is cool. So I won't be able to, I have to abstain from some things, but I can still submit my own papers. And I think I feel like there's a lot of opportunities for all of these things. I haven't yet decided which ones I want to do. I feel like we could have different things in different categories, but more about this later. But I would really, really, really like to do something on the methods project. I don't know yet what format it should be, and I think there's a couple of things we can do as well. So just saying, this is on the docket, coming fast 2 weeks from now to February 21. And the actual event is when? Oh, in July. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to go to that in person, but they do have a virtual component. It's in Australia, so that would be a bit of a trip. But we'll see. I'm excited about that. So that will come too.
Yeah.
Has there been any word about the next? Oh, I forgot. There was some cool stuff happening with like NeuroMatch planning committee. There was email about that. I don't remember what it said, but just like, I don't know. I was going to encourage you wanted to do more of that, Bradley. I don't know if you saw that stuff, but there was some opportunities there.
I'll have to look into it. I don't know. Maybe I missed it, but
yeah, it's probably, it might be too late now also, but like there was like volunteers and planning committee and like different tiers of involvement for different people in the lab can all check it out too. If you're really interested in NeuroMatch stuff, let me know and I can find the email if you don't have it, but I'm sure they're very good about publicizing stuff in general. So yeah.
right.
But I was gonna say, have we heard anything yet about like the next international workshop on embodied cognition or whatever, or those kind of other NeuroMatch events that we typically go to?
I haven't heard anything about the embodied cognition one yet. NeuroMatch will probably be in the fall. So I mean, I guess we're on the mailing list. So when those things come up, I'll be ready to go. I mean, this is what I mean. Like, we don't know how much lead time we're going to get on this, so having things ready to go is always good. But I mean, I don't know what we're thinking about for this year. I know we talked about something from the Cognition Futures group for EI, for embodied intelligence. And this is something that we might even work through in the meetings here. Just like devote maybe 20 minutes to going through some of these ideas and hashing them out. Having like a bunch of ideas that might be good if we could talk about them a little bit more. And it gives us an idea of what maybe we need to do to make it happen, or is it a strong idea or a weak idea? And I think that would be useful for submissions too, because you know, working the getting a abstract, getting like 350 words is one thing, but like having it be really compelling is another. And I don't know if we have too much problem. Well, I mean, if we want to really kind of have really compelling work, or we want to make sure that we're covering all our bases in terms of what we have in terms of expertise in the group, I think it would be useful to do that in the meetings here.
There's I just saw this. There's apparently an international conference on embodied cognitive science that the Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology hosts, which I haven't heard of before.
Yeah, they have Tom Froese and some other people there.
Is he there? Is that where he is?
Yeah.
Oh,
OIST, yeah. It's
okay.
interesting
That's
group
fine.
over there, yeah.
I feel silly. Okay, cool, great. That's all I had for deadlines. But please, as always, anybody has exciting deadlines or things to do, share them. There's a Slack channel for it called submissions and deadline events. But you can just message me or Bradley, or if you don't know, deadlines, especially urgent deadlines. Let us know, because we'll try to see what we can do with them. But I think that's that's all of the stuff I really wanted to cover today. So I don't know what you wanted to do, Bradley, but there's a few other things to potentially bring up, but that's mostly my stuff.
Okay. Well, thank you for the updates, and we'll keep let's keep on the CogSci submission, the paper submission especially, because we want to be able to get that worked out. There's a template for that paper, so it's 6 pages, but it's like the template makes it like more like 8 or 9 of a typical Google Doc, say. So it's it's a bit of writing, a bit of text leeway that you have there, but we want to be able to just make sure that it's in good shape before the submission. The paper submissions to CogSci, the conference, the acceptance rate is somewhat low, so if it gets rejected, I wouldn't be too discouraged about it. But I think it's worth at least submitting.
Yeah, it would. I think it's a good. I think for the methods project, if we're doing a paper on the methods project, yeah, it'll be important. It'll be a lot of work to do. It'll be a great thing to do for the project. Maybe I will try to see it as like a challenge of putting things in that format and going there. But
well, that's what drove the Gibsonian information paper forward. Was it got submitted as a CogSci paper, and then it got developed further. But it pushes things forward in the deadline.
Yeah. Okay.
That sharpens the mind. So I'm going to go on to some of the things that I've got. I'm going to have some features and then maybe talk about some papers after that. So a lot of interesting things going on. I know you had in the Notion, you had something on the AGI debate. So this is on YouTube. YouTube has the AGI debate here. Montreal.ai has a YouTube channel, and they have the AGI debate 3 here. And this is I like what YouTube's doing now with respect to like separating videos out into chapters. So we were doing this manually at one time, and I'd still actually recommend doing this manually if you want to really get a lot of content out of videos. But this actually helps with like finding things in videos that are really long. So, this is like I don't know how long this debate was. It was like about an hour and 15 minutes. They had like these different topics, like Noam Chomsky had a section, history of AI, Gary Marcus, innateness, cognition. Like this, the AI debate was a little bit more structured this time in terms of different topics. So like, they've had these AI debates for a while. It's like, what are we getting? How do we follow up on the first two, but also, what are the salient topics? So I thought, I don't know, I kind of didn't know what to expect from this debate, but it's actually pretty good in terms of the structuring some of the main issues in terms of AI ethics and what the challenges are in AI. So I think that's a really good thing to check out. I think I mentioned it last week, but it's very good. Has a very good structure to it. Maybe this is kind of like how one might approach the methods. Is like you have these issues here. What about what are the things we need to think about in terms of studying this area? Breaking it down into these topical areas. And sometimes these kind of typologies are very useful for people jumping into the field or, maybe kind of rethinking the field. So this is a nice summary. And then I'm making a point about these different chapters because one of the projects I had an intern do once was to go through these YouTube videos. If you have like content that's an hour long or 2 hours long, you don't want people to wade through the video finding things. So what you can do in YouTube is you can actually create bookmarks. So if you right click on the video and you say copy video URL at current time, you can actually get a timestamp for that point in the video. And then you can use that as links to a discussion, queues up a discussion. Now you can build a little library down at the bottom of the video, or you can do it on GitHub, or, in a document or whatever, where it kind of annotates the video. So you say, there's some really interesting content in this meeting, but it's buried in the meeting. So how do I bring that up so that someone can just look at that discussion? And so, you put that link in the list, and that's something. And you can see that YouTube does this automatically. But YouTube's out, the way they do this is like it's segmenting what it thinks is the most important points. You might think that there's a discussion, though, that's separate from this. And so that's where that comes in handy. But another thing we can do with these chapters is that, we want to link them together into like a coherent chain of events. So oftentimes in our meetings here, we have like, discussions over multiple weeks, or we have discussions that, kind of pick up and start up and die down. And those are, that's actually the way people think. So like being able to like have like a annotated document where you say, okay, here's this part of the discussion in this video. Here's another part of the discussion in this video. This is something that YouTube didn't identify as an important segment of this video here. Some of these segments are useful, but they're not continuous. So how do we link them together so that people know, oh yeah, I need to go to this sequence of clips. So I mean that's something that I'm interested in terms of developing for some of what we're doing. But that's kind of an aside to the AI debate. But anyways, this is something that you might want to check out. And there's Jürgen Schmidt-Huber, who has a lot of interesting things to say about AI. He's been doing for a very long time. There's also Noam Chomsky, who's a cognitive scientist. Gary Marcus, of course, is a cog sci person, but also has done AI. Gary Marcus is a linguist by training, so you have linguists. You have Jeff Kloon. Actually, I went to grad school with him. He did a lot of stuff with genetic algorithms originally, but he's also interested in philosophy, and he works now in AI exclusively. So it's a really interesting group of people here. So check that out. So that segues into some of the other articles. This is article by Carlos E. Perez. It's on his Medium. It's called Hive Minds and Artificial Intelligence. We've talked about collective behavior before, and what he's getting at here is this idea of hive minds or collective intelligence and artificial intelligence. So people have talked about hive minds kind of in a science fiction manner for years, and this maybe is science fiction as well. I don't know, but this is an image generated in Midjourney and Stable Diffusion, which are these generative platforms that people are using to generate art from prompts. So we've talked about implementing Stable Diffusion on like a M1 Mac, which so usually these things have required a lot of computational power, but they're moving in a direction where you can implement them on your own machine, or you can modify the code as open source components, so you can use them for a lot of different things. So in this article, he talks about hive mind technologies, or the fusion of hive mind technologies with advanced AI creative tools. And so hive mind technologies are things like social media, but social media is typically prioritize growth and followers and things like that over well-being. Its prioritization of growth over all other concerns has left a path of massive destruction we may never fix. Creating a community for community's sake leads to the creation of cults. So I don't know. I mean, but the point is that these hive minds, or these collective structures, social structures, can come together and do things, and we've talked about that in the open project management sense. But you can also do things like create different types of creative technologies, and so that's where he's going with this blog post. He's talking here about Midjourney, which is a collaborative platform for generating AI art. Its interface is Discord, where everyone can see the AI art you generate. So you generate some art, you put it in the Discord, people can talk about it, and they can reuse what they see, and they can create new art. So this is like something that is very much a community-based thing, where you have people coming together and doing something. In this case, they're making art and remixing art, and that remix is the sort of the creative gist of the community, and that community then is considered a hive mind. Then he says social media is inextricably tied to the tools of creation. So, for example, TikTok, where lending tools for easy video creation has led to an explosion in their platform. So they've had explosive growth based on creating these short videos and sharing them, and people were entertained, or they're inspired to create their own video or whatever. And in any case, hive minds focused on the act of creation can have very different dynamics from a plain information sharing platform. So if you think about something like Twitter or Mastodon, we're sharing information, we're sharing news, we're sharing little tidbits of things. And I guess that's creative in some sense, but having these sort of platforms where you can actually create art or create a video where you have to synthesize things and be, you have to improvise and make up new content or remix old content. That's something that's different. And so you can use Twitter in that way or Mastodon in that way, but it's this idea that you can do this in parallel. So you can have people, creating something in one place, sharing it, and automatically getting feedback. Someone creates something new out of it, and this just goes back and forth, and this really becomes a very rich, fertile community for things. Hive mind is effective because one can design practices around the many ways of human knowing. And then the fascinating thing about Midjourney is that creators are constantly improving their AI prompting skills. So one of the things about this sort of generative image creation is that you use a prompt, and your image is only as good as your prompt. So in this case, you want to describe what you want to see. So you describe to the program, you want to see this group of people walking against a field, or I don't even know what the prompt here was, but you give it a prompt, it gives you an image that it generates. And so if you're specific about your prompt, you can generate some interesting things. if you're vague about your prompt, you might still generate some interesting things. When we did those demos at the end of last year with ChatGPT, we were coming up with all sorts of prompts in the meeting. We were coming up with different things to ask. Please generate this paragraph of text in this style, in the style of a gangster, right? Please describe how to bake cookies in the style of a gangster, I think was one of the examples. And then it was able to do that. But you have to be specific in what you want to see. And so this is quite an interesting set of tools. And so Midjourney has become, or the Discord servers for Midjourney are now the largest on the planet, I guess the largest Discord server on the planet, with over 1 million users. And so you have to feed into this GPU hardware. So someone has to foot the bill for the hardware, and it has to be done in a central location. But it's not always the case. You could actually have people use their own computers and network them together, or you could have some set of decentralized servers. So there are ways that we can do this. There's some capital outlay. People have to make investments in this sort of platform, but the benefit of it far outweighs the cost. And so this is if you're a billionaire, you can be like Elon Musk and invest, buy Twitter and put your thumb all over it, or you can just put the money into something like this, and you can have a nice community that you may not be able to really, and this is for better or for worse, you may not be able to control very easily, but it is very an interesting space. In the past, firms like Facebook cared only for growth and thus tweaked their interaction design to emphasize engagement over all other considerations. This has destroyed democracies all over the world. What is a better world, and how can we design hive mind AI systems that lead to a better world? Where can we find a philosophy and practice that revolves around nurturing and cultivating cultures that are rich in meaning? So it's not to say that these communities don't have bad effects. I mean, we know from social media that sometimes if you have a hive mind with no regulation, it can lead to disinformation and things like that. So obviously, it's not always a net positive. There are ways you can design these communities though that aren't trying to, just kind of give people the tools of creation, but also making sure that there aren't really bad effects that emerge from that. So I mean, there are a lot of things here, a lot of things to think about. Did we have any comments on that?
I want to read a little bit more of his articles. I didn't know there were. I saw a lot in Medium that I wanted to check out. But no, this will be a really good piece, especially for the NICWIC submission. So this is definitely in the vein of that. So I hope I wouldn't mind using it, referencing it in that. Well, one of those sub presentations for sure.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of ethical concerns or ethical issues that come up here, both good and bad. Like if you have a hive mind, you can do a lot of really interesting things, and it might benefit greatly society or people. But it might also be very dangerous in some ways if it's not. If we can figure out how to regulate it without trying to game it in different ways, or trying to just letting people do whatever they want, even if it's spreading anti-vax disinformation or whatever. That the medium always is the thing that we have to strike, and that's I think the underpinning of a lot of the ethics stuff that we've talked about. But that's a thing that we talked about the ethical regulators, and we found how hard that is. I know Brian has a post on that on the Medium, where it's very hard to find, to sort of manage that from the top, right? You can't manage it from the top because there's so many things that happen that are unanticipated once people start interacting, that it's they must have to emerge from that specific set of interactions. Mm-hmm. So, and then there's a lot of governance issues, and we'll talk about governance issues in course that I'm offering. A lot of interesting governance is like something that we typically don't think of as interesting. Well, I mean, it's like we think of it as a set of rules, okay, but there's really, this goes back into the basics of the internet. Like when the internet first started, there was a robust debate about governance and some of the standards. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff on this, so that's a very interesting area. The We Robot, of course, has like some had I guess a panel or some talks on it. So
Yeah, and that's the cool thing. Like, I'm kind of on my list of things to write. There is still the We Robot blog post, and I feel like that arena and that perspective bridges across so many things. Like, where as all of the governance and what we're talking about here specifically, what we're talking about ethics, what we're talking about how we're talking and thinking about, I don't want to say AI entities, but like AI responsibility for the programs and the nature of decision making. There's just a lot going on there, and I feel like I'm very fortunate that we get to talk about it in this lab, because I feel like that's a true like dimension of the frontier that is very important. So yes to all that.
yeah, Amanda or Sushmanth, do you have any comments? Okay. Well, we can put them in the chat if you have comments. The Thoughtful Giant is another. This is from Diverse Intelligence Summer Institute. Yeah, I know. Jesse's excited.
I have to make sure I don't miss that application too.
Yeah. So this is. I know Jesse applied to this a couple summers ago, and it basically brings together a lot of people from different areas allied to like cognitive science and AI. And it's really a way, like there's an institute where people will go and learn about these topics, and it's just what is intelligence and thinking about this in terms of different types of intelligence. So in this case, they're talking about elephant intelligence, and this is the blog post, The Thoughtful Giant. This is from their Many Minds podcast. And then this is actually like an hour-long podcast. So this is really like if you want to go through this, they have an outline here of the different topics. So this is something that so this is someone, Joshua Plotnick from Hunter College in the Department of Psychology. He's doing comparative cognition, where people typically will look at cognition in different animal species and look at like what that's the way they assess intelligence, is by looking at what elephants do, what humans do, what dolphins or a number of different species we find intelligent, crows, what they're doing, and then compare across those species. And so that's one interesting way to think about intelligence, because a lot of times if you're doing AI research, you kind of default to the human intelligence as the intelligence that's worth emulating. And that's not necessarily the case. There's a lot of stuff going on in different species, and they're doing different things.
I put the link in the chat.
Okay, yeah, good. And so, it's interesting to think about that in the context of simulating intelligence, but also what that tells us about the evolution of intelligence. How did intelligence get there in evolution? We talked about, I think in the, it came up in the Cognition Futures group, but this idea of Mike Levin's TAME, or the technological aspect of mind everywhere, which is like the idea that cognition is throughout like life. So you can have single cells, you can have bacteria, you can have all sorts of species within the tree of life exhibiting cognitive behaviors. And the only difference between like cells in humans or bacteria in humans is the competencies that they have. So it's like, if you have consciousness or different types of thresholds for conscious competencies, those are the differences. And one thing you can do with that, of course, is you can put that on what they call a phylogeny or a tree, and you can look at how it's evolved. So people will typically build a tree to look at like differences between species, differences between sometimes very distant differences between, or very distant species that have diverged from a common ancestor. They've diverged for maybe 500,000 years or more. And you can look at like some of the traits that they maybe share, or some of the traits that they have diverged upon. So this is an interesting way to think about evolution. And then that also gives us some information about maybe what an AI should have in terms of its core competencies, or some of the things it might develop as derived, we could call them derived competencies, I don't know. But if you go to the Michael Levin work on TAME, and there's a recent paper on that, that's something that I don't think we've talked about that paper specifically in the group, but that's something that is, I think, a good orientation for thinking in that way. So this actually just goes on about elephant cognition, and so there's this whole study of different brains, which is a subset of comparative cognition. People look at brains and look at the size of the brains and how different parts of the neocortex is expanded between, say, like elephants and other mammals, and looking at those differences. So all mammals have the same sort of neural architecture. They have a neocortex and they have these different aspects, but in some species where you have more pronounced intelligence, let's just say, where they have specializations in cognition that allow them to do specialize in different areas. They have different have an enlarged neocortex, or different adaptations that allow them to have more cognitive capacity. So there's a lot of study on brains in that way. You have other species like cephalopods, which have very different neural architectures from mammals. And so this is really interesting that you can go to cephalopods, which are marine organisms, and they like octopus and some of these other organisms that are really octopus are actually really intelligent. They're able to do things like sneak out of their tank at night in aquariums and wander around. So you can study their brains and their cognition as well. It's very different from the mammalian case, but it's also very much worth thinking about. So yeah, they have a lot of stuff in this podcast. Some of the behavioral aspects of elephants. So, that's one way to assess intelligence. There, different social behaviors, different rearing behaviors, and elephants have something called seismic communication. So there's specific things that they use in terms of their sensory inputs and how they interpret them. So, these are things that are maybe a little bit different than what humans do. And it's worth thinking about that because, our senses are really the sort of the input for our intelligence. If we can't sense something, it's going to be hard for us to sort of conceive of it and have it be part of our intelligence. So, if we can sense things in a certain range of frequencies like light or sound, that's what we're limited to. And of course, with humans, we can create tools that expand that ability. But, some organisms have evolved very specific, a very specific range of frequencies that they're tuned to, that give them special abilities. So, for example, there are a lot of insects that can sample their visual world at a really high frequency. So they can capture many, many images of the environment, and they can act upon that. So there's some insects that sample the world at like 1,000 hertz, as opposed to like what humans sample the world at, which is in the tens of hertz. There are other organisms like frogs that sample their auditory world in a similarly sped up manner. And so you can actually think about how that affects their ability to process information and exhibit intelligence. Then they get into some of this about evolution at the end here. There's this idea of convergent evolution and diverse species. So we have, and maybe I could draw this out because this makes a little bit more sense. So when we talk about evolution, we usually talk about a phylogeny. And so phylogeny is a tree. And so we have phyla at the tips of the tree. So we have a branch of a tree. People usually draw them like this. And pardon me if you already know this, but I'm going to go through it anyways. So this is the branch of a tree, or the trunk of a tree. And this is where we have what we call the common ancestor. And so when Darwin proposed natural selection, but he also proposed this structure of, taxa, which are at the tips of the tree, right? Having a common ancestor. So, you might have humans out here, you might have other mammals out here, you might have cephalopods here, worms, annelids here, and then some other, like bacteria here. And they're related to a common ancestor. They've diverged over time in different ways. The tree just basically captures the divergence and some of these branch points. So there's a common ancestry between humans and other mammals. There are a bunch of traits that evolved in the human direction, other traits that evolved, say these are elephants in this direction. They share a common ancestor that has traits that evolved from a common ancestor further back, and so on and so forth. This common ancestor, there's a common ancestor, there's a concept called LUCA, which is the last universal common ancestor, which is the last universal common ancestor of all life. So you might have plants that come out here and bacteria that come out here, and so this is the common ancestor of all life. These are different types of life, and then you have your taxa at the tip of the tree. Now, the interesting thing about evolution is that you have two different types of phenomena that are working to sort of, demonstrate differences between these taxa. So if I compare humans and elephants, let's say this is humans, this is elephants. This is just really basic, but this, I think it illustrates what I'm trying to talk about. So in humans, you have certain traits that are sort of unique to humans, and in elephants, you have certain traits that are unique to elephants. All right, they have a common ancestor. And of course, there are a lot of different taxa in the human lineage or lineage leading up to humans, like a lot of hominid species, great ape species. You have, primates as a whole order. And then you have elephants, which have a corresponding order. And they're related, but they're related by a common ancestor. So there are a whole bunch of unique traits here, a whole bunch of unique traits here. Now, the one way you can think about this is that they have what they call shared derived characteristics, which is another way of saying that they have characteristics that are different from this common ancestor that are shared between humans and elephants. So, for example, live births are shared between humans and elephants. What they call the tetrapod body plan is shared between humans and elephants. You have 2 arms, 2 legs, and a tail. Humans don't have a tail, but we have it's something that our immediate ancestors had, and something that we have like sort of as a residual thing in our anatomy. The point is that there are a lot of shared derived characteristics. There are also unique characteristics which are unique to the taxon. So in humans, there are some things that are just unique, and elephants, there are things that are just unique, and those are those are what we're interested in. Now, sometimes you have different divisions. So sometimes you have what we call convergent evolution. So if we think of like bats and birds, they're separated by a good amount of phylogenetic distance. Bats actually are mammals, right? And than birds, and I mean, we're like the taxa are of a different sort of quantity. I mean, bats are actually pretty diverse. Birds are even more diverse, but we have avians, all right, and these are different different taxonomic in different taxonomic locations. So they have a common ancestor. There's a common ancestor of birds and mammals, right? And then they have that common ancestor had certain traits that were shared, right? And then they diverged. And so they both actually, the point here is that they both fly. So flight is a thing that they share, okay? So one might be tempted to say, well, flight evolved back in the common ancestor, and it's divergent, and they've developed their own method of flight. But actually, if you look at bats and you look at mammals, bats evolved from mammals. Not all mammals can fly. And in fact, bats have developed their flight as a specialization. So there are other mammals here where they've actually, we don't know, the common ancestor didn't probably have fly like either a bird or a bat. It just kind of is there, and it has like different. So this bird mammal this common ancestor didn't fly. And then, of course, birds and bats fly. So what happened here was you had convergent evolution. Bats can fly, birds can fly. They develop different means, or they evolve different means by which they can fly. And as a consequence, they've evolved different traits. So they have unique traits to each type of flight. And if you look at birds and bats, they fly in different ways. And so there's this convergent evolution, what they call convergence, which means that they don't share a common mechanism for this, but they both exhibit the same thing. So they both exhibit the same basic function, but they've done it in different ways. And so this relates to intelligence, in a number of ways. So number one, you might ask, what is it that is common about intelligence across species? If we look at elephants and we look at humans and we look at social insects and we look at dolphins and we look at crows, they all share certain aspects of intelligence, but they also have these convergent evolution, these things that are convergently evolved. And so, there are things that every intelligent species has to have. They might acquire it in different ways, but they're also there. And so those are, when you're doing comparative cognition, those are two things you have to think about. And so if we, even if we take that and we apply it to artificial intelligence and take a step further, what are the things that artificial intelligence should have that are both sort of things that every intelligent species should have, or every intelligent agent should have? What is the base of that? And that goes back to the AGI debate. They talked about innateness, which is a topic that people have kind of approached from a purely psychological standpoint, which is, what is it, if I can't learn something, I should just program it in as an innate feature. Maybe we can learn languages, but we learn languages from a base of phonemes. We have to have those phonemes as an innate feature of the agent, and then we can have it learn language. They can't learn certain things without those innates. This is a little bit different way of thinking about this, in that these innates are things that sort of core competencies of the agent. What does the agent have to have as this common ancestor? So this common ancestor is going to have some things. It maybe doesn't have something like flight, but it does have certain precursors to, that where it might at one point evolve a competency. And this is kind of not a very good example, because bats, there's a lot of intermediate space between the type of specialized flight bats have and mammals. So, it's nice to know that mammals can fly in some way, but that's not something that it's prepared for, primed for. Birds, of course, there are some birds that don't fly, but just to think about, this is kind of a sloppy example, but just to think about this in terms of these innates, there's certain core things that every intelligent agent should have. And then if there's something that is like a specialized environment that it goes into, or sometimes in evolution we have these contingencies. So once you go down this lineage of mammals and you're divergent from this common ancestor, there's stuff evolving in this avian lineage that is, where you're working towards these wings. And with mammals, you don't have that. You're evolving in a different direction, and so you can't evolve wings like a bird because you just don't have those adaptations that have emerged in this avian lineage. So bats had to work with what they had in terms of their mammalian traits that were already in place, and so they ended up with that type of flight. So there are robotic constraints in evolution that also occur. And so if you think about this in terms of innates, we might have like some core competencies, and then we might have some specializations, and then we might want to have further specializations in our agent. Well, we can't backtrack with AI. With AI, it's a little bit easier because you don't have to conform to the constraints that you have in biology. But it's interesting to think about it in that way, of having these core common ancestry aspects of your agent, and then having these derived aspects of your agent, and then having these constraints on the design. If we want to have these things in the agent, we have to do it in a certain way. And so that's that's the way I'm going to kind of leave it. I'm going to leave it at that because I think that's maybe we can discuss that later. But that's something I thought was very interesting in light of some of the work we've been doing with our agents.
Yeah, I want to listen to the podcast. I'm kind of I guess I can say I forgot about the Dizzy podcast, which is weird for me to say, but it hasn't been something I've been paying attention to recently. So I really wanted us to listen to the whole thing, but it'd be nice to have more discussion about that ahead for sure.
Yeah. It was a very loose discussion of that area. I think there's a lot to be said about comparative cognition and thinking about like intelligent agents, and typically people don't think about it from the phylogenetic perspective, but it's very useful. And then going back to the AGI debate, or the AI debate, and I guess it's an AGI debate because their whole that's what the YouTube video is labeled. It says AGI debate, but it's really
that seemed to evolve as theme this year.
Yeah. So, thinking about that, there's a lot on architecture and common sense and cognition and neuroscience. They kind of broached, I think Noam Chomsky kind of broached development a little bit, but I wasn't satisfied with what he was saying. And I think we talked about that in one of the Cognition Futures reading groups at the end of last year, where we talked about some of the things about how there's a sort of implication that intelligence is just kind of like, conferred upon some agent. Like in humans, the idea that there's intelligent behavior in humans and that doesn't have any phylogenetic precursors. That's just kind of like this new, this thing that's conferred somehow. And it's not necessarily by deity, but it's like the same kind of thinking where, okay, well, we don't really know where this comes from. It just kind of emerges and it's unique to humans. Whereas, you could take the approach where there's a really deep history of this in a deep phylogeny where there's a common ancestry to this that's shared amongst like birds and humans. It gets adapted in different ways, but it's like a core thing.
You kind of want to like insert like a new challenger appears and like bring in Michael Levin and have him talk about all of this stuff.
Yeah.
I would really like to see that. I wonder if I gotta this is so important, like all the stuff I want to look into again. But yeah, I think that's a good point, and I do remember talking about that in the reading group. I forget which one it was, but I remember that happening, and I wonder was in the reading group, was that a critique of? I don't know if it was Chomsky mentioned specifically, but it was the idea of. Well, I know Michael Levin mentioned it in the podcast, and it was I think it was a specific podcast, but I don't remember what caused that discussion to happen in the reading group. Do you?
I think it was talking about like language, and it was talking about sensory motor function. It was talking about like some of these things with experience, and and then you say, well, is this something that humans have? And you find out, well, there's sensory motor behaviors that are related to language that are in humans, but those things go much deeper. It's like other animals don't have our language capacity, but they do have the capacity to communicate and use their bodies. And so then that begs the question, like, how far back does that extend in evolution? And it turns out that there's a lot of, in most of the primates, you have things that are going on that are similar but not the same. So it's not like just this thing that you see in humans. There are different variations on this throughout, like primates in the tree of life, where you use similar mechanisms. So like, even in like birds or in social insects, even they use their bodies to communicate. They use their bodies to facilitate their cognition and things like that. So
yeah, and even like that so there's two things. One of them is my biggest, one of the biggest things that stay with me during the Augmenting Brains conference at MIT a few weeks ago was the writing to the body. And they didn't say this, but my take is like reading from the body too, like reading and writing from the body, and what that means, kind of in terms of the what we talked about last week with the sort of consumer grade EEGs that are being purposed to very specific ways of getting around cognitive stuff and just having a different take on signal interpretation in the body. So that's sort of one thing. But also, maybe a little more directly to what you're saying, is like those like I follow a couple of folks on Instagram who have those like voice pads with their dogs.
Oh yeah.
Like those press, like the dog will basically communicate using language in a way. It cannot form the words.
Right.
And it's not perfect, but it can there are definite
they recognize words without a grammar necessarily. It's just
right.
Like,
there are definite attempts at identifying certain objects or events or activities. And it's like, I think that's not exactly what you're getting at, but I think there's sort of I remember, I noticed this before, but I had this conversation with someone saying, oh, our dog is really dumb, they wouldn't survive in the wild. And I'm like, I feel like, and they said something to the extent of, I don't think this animal would, and they're being joking about it. I said, they're being a little bit lighthearted about it. And then they said, I heard about the communication stuff, and they were like, oh, I don't think this dog would say much. And I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sure they wouldn't either. But I heavily guarantee that the internal mind of what this creature is thinking about saying and how they're filtering it, because the dog is very conscientious. Like they're noticeably conscientious. This one in particular was like super, like, you could see its mind working about, how am I going to phrase this interaction with this person? I'm like, I think that'd be fascinating to see. It's like, so it's sort of this interesting dilemma of, and it kind of goes into Fuchs here too. Like Fuchs in the last part of our book was talking about, it's true that there's some things that are impossible about like your emotional or internal state to communicate or convey. And like, yeah, that applies here, but at the same time, like I guess for me, it's really clear at this point, and I may be fun to explore in the future, which is like, dogs don't have the verbal infrastructure. And this is kind of interesting what we're talking about with the flying just now too. Dogs do not have, at least from what I understand, they have like an infrastructural challenge to using words basically. Like it's not, I don't think it's a feasible option for them to actually create something like words right now. There are different moans and whimpers, but the way we use words, the way we articulate our expression vocally in other ways is, different. But if you remove those, and this isn't really the best term, but like those infrastructural barriers, I don't think there would be a lack of, even as things stand, I don't think there would be a lack of information being processed or communicated or decided upon, or how to speak, what to say. Like I'm obviously speaking unscientifically, but I pretty much know that the dog is doing all that stuff without the words, So anyway,
Yeah.
a lot of interesting paths to go down on that discussion. That tree.
Yeah. So yeah, that's good. And then so I guess I wanted to move on to some papers. I know we're getting kind of close to the end of the meeting, but I wanted to go over two papers. This is on epigenetics. So I don't know, I just wanted to go over these different papers. This one's probably maybe more accessible here. And this is from Pulse Biology. The other one's going to be more technical, but I'm going to talk about it because I think it's relevant. When we talk about epigenetics, and we talk about this occasionally, it's an interesting area because there are actually a couple of different definitions of epigenetics. So one is like this idea that there's a technical term in biology, which is that you have specific mechanisms that are like sort of sit on top of the DNA when it's transcribed, and it affects the transcription of DNA. And this is a highly technical term. We talk about them as epigenetic marks, and people will use them often, especially in like places like stem cell biology, to describe like different changes in the cellular state. And so, there are all sorts of epigenetic marks in the genome that can be that can modify how things are transcribed, how they build proteins, and then what they result in as a phenotype. So their function. But then there's this other term, and they use this in psychology more, which is this idea of epigenetics as this unfolding process. So like epigenetics goes from like an embryo to a human body, or like from some precursor to a mature state. And so people will use epigenetics like that. And, oftentimes you'll see the word and you'll think, okay, I know what it means. But it's very different definition, I think, in like developmental psychology versus developmental biology. And then in this paper, they talk about unifying the two meanings of epigenetics. So Sui Hong, who's a systems biologist in Seattle, I think at this ISB Science organization. And so the abstract here is the notion of epigenetic marks used by molecular biologists. That's what I was talking about when I talked about these markers that sit on top of the DNA as before it's transcribed, affects transcription and that, which means it's just read by like a machinery that turns it into RNA. You don't need to know any more than that right now, but so these marks are ways that this process becomes modified. So different parts of the gene are read and not others, and depending on their activational state. So these epigenetic marks, this is something molecular biologists used. This is conceptually disconnected from the idea of Waddington's epigenetic landscape. So this is something that's used by systems biologists and biophysicists. I don't know if we've talked about in these meetings. We've talked about them in the DVOR meeting a lot. But the epigenetic landscape is like, it's this landscape, if you think about a landscape. This landscape this is sort of the origin point up here, and then this is the final point, or the final state. And one of the things that defines an epigenetic landscape is you have these channels. So it kind of looks like a tree, and it's a developmental tree. but it's structured as a set of channels. It's like a river basin where you have a bunch of channels that, start from an origin point and then lead out to the ocean, where you have branching structure. And then you have, a lot of times, Waddington envisioned this ball, which is the current state of the system. And the ball travels down this path, down these channels, and it takes a certain developmental path to the final state, which is the mature state, or in the parlance of a river basin and the ocean, which is, this is all metaphor. And so the idea here is that you have this state, this active state that starts at an origin point, moves down one of these paths, and then has this contingency to it, which says that what we observe as the phenotype has gone through these different changes, these different switching events, and then ends up in this final state. So when we see a phenotype, we can say it's gone through these changes, it has these contingencies in its development, and it can't reverse and go back up this way. Although some people argue that in some types of cellular dedifferentiation you can do that, but that's neither here nor there. The point is, this is the conceptual model. It's disconnected from this idea of epigenetic marks, and that's in turn disconnected from the psychological definition which I gave, which is this idea of an unfolding process. So this paper goes over how these schools of thought can be united. I thought this was an interesting paper because it kind of gets into this idea of having a very technical definition that's sort of reductionist, and then it's very different from this sort of systems view. And there's the epigenetic landscape, but then there's also the idea of unfolding, which is the idea that you see in developmental psychology. Although people, I think, do use Waddington's landscape more in that as well. I've seen, in developmental systems theory, I've seen people apply the landscape concept there. But it's, and then people have actually tried to merge the two through, thinking of these channels as having, they've tied gene expression to it in different ways. So, underneath this landscape, these branches are defined by, the interactions of genes and their expression. So you might turn a gene on here or turn a gene off at one of these branch points, and it leads this ball to move one way or another. And so there are ways you can reconcile these technically, but I think conceptually it's also important to think about these things, how they relate technically. So this is an example of systems epigenetics, where you have this transformation that occurs through this this model of the epigenetic landscape. This is connected to the molecular biology through these genetic regulatory networks. Molecular epigenetics describe basically the same thing, except they don't really focus on the systems description. They focus on the set of mechanisms, which makes it even more reductionist in the sense of finding a mechanism, finding very specific mechanisms, and making predictions. So, you have these things like bistable switches, you have repression, you have other types of mechanisms that are very disconnected from these networks, from these landscapes, and from this transformational process. So, there are ways that you can reconcile these concepts, but, you have to recognize first that these are different concepts. They're very different conceptually and probably also mechanistically. So, going back to this idea of reconciling landscapes with this idea of, this technical definition of epigenetics, you can use things like gene regulatory networks. You can use these networks to lock in expression states, producing stable patterns. So, there's a lot you can do with dynamical systems here that can describe things and unify these two concepts. And so it kind of goes through a lot of technical stuff in the article, which I won't get into, but basically he's trying to reconcile this systems description with a reductionist description. So the second paper is the evolution of 3D chromatin organization at different scales. And this is dealing with this mechanistic aspect, but dealing with it at different scales. So this is a very technical paper. I'm not going to go through the methods here, but it basically, the argument here is that most animal genomes fold in 3D chromatin domains called topologically associated domains, facilitate interactions between cis-regulatory elements, CREs or CREs, and their promoters. And so, owing to the critical role of control in developmental gene expression, we explore how TADs, or topologically associated domains, have shaped animal evolution. So what we can do here is we can use phylogeny, as I described before, and we can look at these different domains across species. So we can make this comparative approach sort of work in terms of describing these different changes. So we think about these these little diagrams here are epigenetic. There's sort of a tool in epigenetics they use to visualize how these marks are laid out in the genome. They describe like different sites and their activation, and so they show these across species as they're measured. And so, there isn't a lot of insight here other than they have different patterns, but you can actually use these patterns to group, to compare that with the known phylogeny. So actually it's interesting because it gives you a different tree topology than we're used to, but it gives you a different way of looking at it. You can group different taxa based on their pattern here, and then you can look at like different functions. So you have, for example, jawed vertebrates, chordates, deuterostomes, and they're all in these groups that are nested. So you have these different species that are maybe very distantly related, but they have these traits that get shared between them. And so this is one way of looking at these comparative studies by using phylogenetics, using data from different types of mechanisms. So looking at epigenetics is very different than looking at like phenotypic traits or genetic traits, and you can come to some pretty interesting conclusions using this type of an approach. So you can group different organisms by different taxonomic categories, and you can say, okay, there's something going on with this category that they have in common in terms of their epigenetics. And so then we can ask why that is, and then we can find out why certain marks are activated at certain times. You can say, okay, it's because of this set of traits. And so I don't know, like this isn't necessarily related to comparative cognition, but it's certainly one way to think about how to do these kind of comparative studies. Now, this is at the mechanistic level. If we think about it at the systems level, we could build epigenetic landscape that describes some of these different taxa and how they experience development, maybe some of the commonalities, maybe some of the differences, and look at that. The reason I point to this paper isn't to like stress the technical aspects of it, but to show how you can do these kind of analyses in a study. So yeah, that's those papers in epigenetics. I wanted to finish up with this. It's I think it's an overview of Ashby's cybernetic systems. It was based on a tweet. I think. Let's see where I start here. So yeah, this is Kevin Mitchell, Wearing the Brain on Twitter. This is also, I think, on Mastodon. But he was reading this book, actually. He's been reading these books in systems theory. This is the outline of general systems theory by von Bertalanffy. And he was just making, he's been making some insights about some of these books. So he read this book and he read the one, Cybernetics by Ashby. And that's the one I'm going to talk about a little bit here. But this is actually his insight here. He liked this book. He says it's an integrative science of organization dynamics, general principles, and deep isomorphisms across diverse classes of systems. So, we think about like complex systems and what I just talked about with epigenetics and some of these concepts. One of the things and even like comparative cognition, one of the things we're looking at besides common ancestry or these isomorphisms between different types of systems or classes of systems. So you can think of different intelligences as different classes of systems and look for these isomorphisms. So this is another way of viewing this, another perspective on it. This is Designed for a Brain by W. Ross Ashby. It's a really interesting book because he gets into like building something he calls the homeostat, which is a very early general intelligence that works on the principles of regulating different things. That you have this array of processors and it's like regulating itself. And it's really kind of an interesting book because it's back from like the late 50s. So this isn't something that is from like the last decade. This is really far back with respect to intelligent systems. Let's see. What is this one? This is Principles of the Self-Organizing System. This is a short paper that Ashby wrote on some of these ideas. He talks about what is organization. Some of the things about, we talk about regulation as a very general thing, but one of the things about Ashby's work is he really gets into some of these like systems level phenomena and some of the things that, like we don't really talk about too much anymore. Like, where we talk about conditionality, communication, these are things that we don't really think about too much when we talk about regulation, whole and part. So this is, we talk about holism versus reductionism. We're talking about essentially wholes and parts. And so, these are things that kind of go back in the history of cybernetics, but also can be applied to some of the current problems that we have. They think about it more in control theory, but we can think about it in terms of intelligence more broadly, and then applying it to machines. So let's see. These are just some quotes from, I think, Ashby's work. That's something else. So this is where I think it's Ashby talking about isolated systems versus open systems. So this process of progression towards the specially resistant form is of extreme generality, demanding only that the operator or the physical laws of any physical system be determinate and unchanging. This is the general or abstract point of view. The biologist sees a special case of it when he observes the march of evolution, survival of the fittest, and the inevitable emergence of the highest biological functions and intelligence. Now, this view here in this sentence is kind of not what I was talking about with phylogeny and looking at common ancestry and different things like that, because he's viewing evolution here as sort of survival of the fittest and, emerging to like sort of a top, a perfect intelligence. And of course, if we look at what's going on with comparative cognition, that's certainly not the case, because the case could be made that there are all different types of intelligences that have evolved in phylogeny. So putting that aside, thus when we ask what is necessary that life and intelligence should appear, which is the question, I guess, that we're asking when we ask about like, why are we intelligent? Why do we have intelligent organisms? Why is intelligence there? The answer is not carbon or amino acids or any other special feature, but only that the dynamic laws of the process should be unchanging, that the system should be isolated. In any isolated system, life and intelligence inevitably develop. They may, in degenerate cases, develop only to 0 degree. I'm not really sure what I think is interesting. I didn't even know that was something that Ashby had made. I don't know what he means by unchanging, or that the system should be isolated. I'm not really sure. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just thinking about this in terms of what we just talked about. When I read this first, I didn't think about it, but it's a different view from like this evolutionary view, even though he mentions survival of the fittest, because actually my opinion here is that intelligence is really a product of a changing environment. That when you have a changing environment, you need to be intelligent to exploit it, or to have like be able to buffer against some of the changes that occur. If you had an unchanging environment, you could just make everything innate. You could have like a mechanistic system, and it would be good enough probably. But the changing environment is the thing that I would argue is what's driving the evolution of intelligence. And that the system should be isolated is, I don't know what that means, but a lot of times people have argued that sociality is a key aspect of the evolution of intelligence. And we see that in collective intelligence. But it's something that we should think about more. Going back to some of these things that people have talked about with respect to that. So this is Kevin's, he was reading this paper, Principle of Self-Organizing Systems, all about organization, constraint, function relative to what, which is a question, system states, and especially the idea or the fact that complex systems can adopt many states will over time come to dwell in more states that are less perturbed by changes in the environment. So that's what he was talking about. But I mean, the argument could also be made that, I guess the idea would be that you start from, it's a very statistical physics kind of point of view. You start from all states being possible to a restricted set of states, and an increasingly restricted set of states are isolated from changes in the environment, which is actually true of development, that things get protected from the environment as they sort of develop. You're not subject to like the whims of the environment as much. But at the same time, that's not true because we do have, all sorts of variation in the environment that the organism responds to. So this is what I was just talking about. Ashby's claim is that any isolated system of sufficient complexity under repeated environmental selection will tend to develop what he calls life and intelligence. So this is where there's repeated environmental selection, but it gets isolated, so it becomes isolated from the environment. So I mean, that's the way that's being interpreted. And it's kind of like when you go back to some of these older, if you go back to anything before like 1970, people take a little bit more liberty with what their sort of their English. It's very flowery and not necessarily as descriptive. So I think intelligence here means fittedness to the environment and adaptability or robustness to the most typical dynamics. So there's this issue of robustness, which we won't get into, but a system has to be robust to environmental changes, and they may be part of this isolation that Ashby's talking about. But this is a really interesting thread, and there's a lot I think we can learn from what people are thinking about maybe 70 years ago, and especially like in the area of cybernetics and linking it to stuff like development and evolution. Suzanne Still wrote a paper on the thermodynamics of prediction, which is actually this paper here, which is a preprint, and it kind of goes into some of what's going on with like this statistical mechanics point of view and how this leads to intelligent behaviors like prediction. So that's all I'm going to talk about today. I went through that last part. That was kind of a whirlwind through that topic, but I thought that, I think these things all link together, and I hope that like this is food for thought for people.
Yeah, that was all really interesting. I started to try to just like read some of these original works in cybernetics, and I should get back to that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll revisit these papers.
Okay.
Yes, I wonder, we don't really have a lot of surplus, but I feel like there could almost be I don't want to say early cybernetics reading group, but like older books reading group. But there's just like reading groups. There could be also like I would like a Michael Levin reading group, a Tony Shamara reading groups. I don't know, like, and I don't know if that will happen, but if anybody, if future interns are watching this, I had a few people email me during this video, catching up from last email, but if interns are watching something like, oh, I'd love to do more with like cybernetic stuff or Levin's work or Kevin Mitchell's. I was looking at his tweets right now and I retweeted some of them and trying to find things that you mentioned. There's a lot there that sort of really valuable stuff that we should process and look more at. So
Yeah.
sounds
I would
good.
do like an early cybernetics reading group, because that would also help, and this is like, yeah, good for interns. Maybe we don't all read the same things, but if we could like find these older, more foundational texts that would help with this like ontology of cybernetics project, where we're trying to piece apart like what are the fundamental concepts, so, and then like how can we apply them to more contemporary problems.
Do you all think that that would fit? And I'm not trying to, this is a straight question and not me trying to imply I want to do this with the methods project, but do you think that would fit within the kind of banner of the methods project, like cybernetics ontology investigation? Or do you think that's separate enough to not try to fit it in that context?
I think it's, I can like see those pieces fitting together, but I'm not, I think it's better to start with those as separate projects.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Something to think about. Because I think I'm kind of leaning towards what you said, but I just had the thought now, so we can discuss it later. But yes, I agree with everything Amanda said about all that, and a lot of food for thought, a lot of things to digest on that. So I did take decent. I didn't get everything, but I put a lot of like just these notes into Notion and like cited some of the papers and some of the stuff. I don't know how to really. If you have any like good tweets, like I'm kind of finding like the tweet links to throw in there.
Yeah.
That would be good to have in the Notion too, but I'm a little bit less sure where those are. So yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, this is great. So I appreciate that.
All right. Well, thanks for attending. Looks like Sushmanth had to leave, but that's people come and go in the meetings. So have a good week. Look forward to next week, or if you have anything you want to present next week, let me know, or during the Cognition Futures group or whatever.
Oh, so I was on camera before, but that's okay. All right, everybody. Take care.
Take
See you
care.
next week.
All right. See you. Bye.
See you Wednesday.
See you Wednesday.